This week, how can the federal government repair its relationship with Western Canada? Also, is a carbon tax having a positive effect on the environment? This and much more to come. I'm Glenn McGuinness, and this is Outburst.
Separatist movement is going on full blast here, and I don't blame them.
I don't know if we pay for import oil out here, but why don't we keep those dollars in Canada?
I don't agree with the carbon tax at all. I think there's better ways to achieve that. It's just another tax grab to me.
Yes, it'll have a positive effect on the environment, but not on everybody's pocketbook, and that seems to be frustrating for a lot of people and businesses.
Tensions between Western Canada and Ottawa are becoming increasingly apparent. For starters, no Liberals were elected in Alberta or Saskatchewan, and many Westerners feel ignored, even isolated by Ottawa, and sentiment seems to be growing to break off from Canada. Even though it's 2019, those who have been around long enough will tell you it feels a little bit like 1980, when Pierre Trudeau's governing Liberals put forth the National Energy Program, which sought larger controls over the oil and gas industry and created a wedge between the East and the West. So, how can we prevent history from repeating itself? Our question.
What could the federal government do to repair its relationship with Western Canada?
That's a really good question. They have a lot of work to do to repair that relationship. They probably have to start looking at the economy and how they can balance it out across the country, and start looking at the things that Saskatchewan and Alberta need most, which are probably the pipelines, among other things. And probably come and visit and check out what those towns that are suffering the most look like right now.
I feel like we've got a government that's more concerned about getting reelected, and they listen to concerns in Eastern Canada. They do things like protect jobs in Quebec with SNC-Lavalin, but I don't see them trying to protect jobs out here as much. We got a lot of oil workers out there that have lost their jobs, and the concern doesn't seem to be there in the same way that it would be if those people were in Quebec.
Reach out to us and listen to our concerns and make us a part of Canada. Like, oil's our industry, potash is our industry. Be more inclusive. That's it.
I think they got to listen a little bit more to our local people, listen to the business people. And I know we're all about pipelines and our mining sector as well. So, our agricultural sector, I don't think they get it.
I think it's the oil companies that they need to repair relationships with, because in Alberta, that's who really runs the show, is oil companies. Even with an NDP government, we were pro-pipeline. So
politics is more than just, okay, I stand for this. It's also, we have to see how we can make everybody work together, right? So it's more than just like I'm in one political party. We got to all work together and get the work done.
They go by seats with population, I believe, how many seats you get. But every province, I think, should have the same amount of seats. Shouldn't matter about your population.
I think what the federal government needs to do is, first of all, start communicating, which they don't. They have been dictating a lot of their own terms till now. It's time that they pay attention to this side of Canada as well, because we contribute a lot to the economy.
We're very unincluded. Ottawa will just do whatever Ottawa wants, regardless of how it affects the rest of Canada. It seems like Ottawa's the milestone of Canada, when really, like a few years ago, if you look back at 2008, Calgary was the powerhouse of all Canada. And now we're just like slumping by, like licking our wounds, kind of be like, when are we going to catch ground again? Like we don't have much traction, to get ahead.
First off, start that pipeline, and stop wasting our money buying it and then making pretentious calls like he's been doing, right? So, that's what it is about. That's why the separatist movement is going on full blast here, and I don't blame them.
It's been dismal for 5 years now, and it's not really getting any better, and it's frustrating when you see your government saying they're going to build a pipeline but clearly not coming through with it. I don't know why we're purchasing oil from other countries and to supply the East when we have oil in our own country. We should have pipelines. It's the safest mode to transfer.
I think that in the relationship with Western Canada, the government needs to look at looking at the economic issues that are important in Western Canada and look at how we can maybe mitigate the alienation by working together and meeting with leaders in Western Canada like Alberta and Saskatchewan, talk about how we can build together as a country again.
There's going to have to be a lot of give and take right now from the federal government, not only with Western Canada, but I think Quebec, and there's a different ball playing field now for the federal government. They have to have people on side to pass their legislation, they have the coalitions, they have to do a lot of things that they didn't have to do before.
The federal government and the whole country really needs to listen to the needs of each individual province and territory to understand where they're coming from and where they want to go. You know, we're all in this together, and we really need everybody to be to understand each other's needs.
It should go beyond provincial politics to a more Canada-wide view of the necessity for us to have our own reliable oil supply. I don't know how you do that, unfortunately, because you're going to have to get consensus. But I think it has to be, it's a national issue. It shouldn't be determined by disagreements between provinces.
I think the country is very divided right now. As you saw with the seats in the Alberta and Saskatchewan, it's all conservative, and then as you go to the east, it's more liberal. So I think that's more of an issue than anything. If we can become more of a country as a whole, I think you would be able to fix a lot of issues going on both sides of Canada.
Like, Western Canada needs to understand that times are changing, and we're trying really hard to get away from oil and everything because it's so bad for the environment, but I understand that all their lives depend on it.
I'd say, for one thing, build that pipeline. That pipeline he bought, it's been billions of dollars. He decided to put it in the put it on the shelf. That's what I've been hearing is the biggest thing is a jobs crisis in Alberta. That's what's I think is causing the alienation, just from my understanding.
Oh, that's a tough one. First of all, I don't care who's in representative. You got to just be humble and get out there and talk to the people. Right now, Alberta wants a pipeline. There's a pipeline that should go out to Eastern Canada too. Because, I don't know if we pay for import oil out here, but why don't we keep those dollars in Canada and help pay for, the pipeline? That's just one example. I mean, there's obviously a lot more.
A good portion of your hard-earned cash goes towards taxes. But where and how the federal government spends that cash is something that Canadians take a great interest in. Whether it's towards healthcare, infrastructure, wherever you think this money may go, how do you think it would be best spent? Our question.
How would you like to see the government spend your tax dollars?
Spend it on the people, our people, the Canadian people, not foreigners or anything else, or sending it over to other countries and whatnot like he's been doing, which is a total joke. He should be spending it right here in Canada. Work on the homeless in Canada, work on things like that, Work on getting this pipeline going after he spent $4+ billion, wasting our money. That's what I want to see it spent on.
I would like them to do more for addiction treatment. There's a lot of people dying from opioids, and I think that's the #1 health crisis in our society right now.
I personally would like to see tax dollars spent on putting it towards new technologies. I am in the technology sector, so investment in new technologies I think is always a win.
Basically, reduction is everything what we need, because the thing is, there is, if you look at Calgary or Alberta, there is a certain level of recession going on. Okay, so it's not like nobody's. It's not like people are generally, especially the people who are from the lower minimum range to about 30s, they're not jumping in any of their wages. So a help from the government could be that if they're reducing our tax loans or our taxes, that would actually help us. Yeah, and that's what the Conservative government had promised us. So that's the reason they had my vote.
Infrastructure for one. For the other one, for the federal government to get pipelines, suspended on pipelines, on energy.
I'd like to see more spent on healthcare, education, infrastructure, and the environment's important too, but we have to be reasonable and we have to be responsible that we don't shut down industries in order to achieve those goals. There should be a plan, it should be long term, and it should take people along with it, not leave them behind and shut down their jobs and their ability to make a living.
Wisely. I would like them to look towards the future. I'd like them to spend their money for the 4 years after the next election, not the 4 years of this election. I'd like them to look beyond the window of their elected part and look at what it looks like in the future for all of us.
Well, I think first and foremost, I think health would be a big thing for me. Infrastructure, pipeline, creating jobs. I think that's paramount with most people now. There's social issues that, right across Canada with, with job loss. I think it was out in Alberta there the other day. The government just cut, I think it was 2,000 public sector jobs that are in their budget. So I think that's what's going to have to be done.
For mental health, for veterans, for older people, for the younger, the education, there's a lot. There's a lot that actually really seriously needs to be looked at and budgeted better.
The overall well-being for all Canadians. So there's all kinds of ways to look at that. Ensuring everybody has access to basic needs is one thing. Ensuring that people can aspire to the things that they would like to aspire to is another thing. So I think there's a lot of different ways to do it, but I don't know what the answers are.
I really hate the amount of waste there seems to be with military procurement programs. I don't understand why that is such a disaster on such a continuous level. So that's one thing that bothers me. As long as it's conscientious and reliable, I'm happy with their priorities in general.
Children, different things, education, schooling, healthcare, different programs that they could do. I mean, school nutrition, lunch programs, different things like that.
I work in healthcare, so I would really like to see improvements in healthcare because we're very short-staffed, and I know the wait times are very long, but that's also trying to reduce costs for the government. So that's kind of all right, but generally just trying to get better prescription care because we don't have any, and better, more nurses on staff and everything would really help.
I would say more towards education. Right now, I think tuition, for example, student loans. I think a lot of people got a lot of high student loans, and with that as well, there's a lot of interest rates on student loans. I don't think that should be a thing. So I think money towards that would be great.
In the people, specifically on poverty, I would say, if I was to give an honest answer.
I don't want to see tax dollars going to maybe some wasteful things. I know a lot of money has been going outside the country for developments in other countries, but I think that we should be looking forward, looking after our own country first.
Tommy Douglas was the first leader of the federal NDP. Who succeeded him? Jack Layton, Thomas Mulcair, David Lewis.
Layton? David Lewis. Thomas Mulcair.
Jack Layton?
Best guess would be Jack Layton.
It would be David Lewis, wouldn't it?
It would be David Lewis. Very good, sir.
Thank you very much.
David Lewis served as the leader of the New Democratic Party from 1971 to 1975 after Tommy Douglas retired. Born in Russia as David Losh, Lewis moved to Montreal with his family in 1921. He would go on to study law at McGill and later became a lawyer in Ottawa. In the 1930s, Lewis became the National Secretary for the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, the party that would later become the NDP. Lewis was first elected to the House of Commons in 1962 in York South and served as an MP from 1965 to 1974. During the 74 election, he uttered his most famous line, calling Canadian corporations corporate welfare bums. After retiring from politics, he became a professor at Carleton University. Lewis was made a member of the Order of Canada in 1976.
A carbon tax is a price on carbon emissions. It was implemented by the federal government, and it sets a price per ton on carbon, which is converted into a tax on electricity, natural gas, or oil. While many environmentalists applaud a carbon tax, many Canadians are seeing its effects at the pumps or even in their home heating bills. So what are your thoughts on the matter? Is this something that is working, or is this something that is just costing you more money? Our question.
Do you feel a carbon tax is having a positive effect on the environment?
I don't know yet if it's having specifically a positive effect, but certainly the idea is necessary and it's a step in the right direction.
I think it is. I guess depending on who you're going to ask, there has to be something done somewhere in order to make this planet sustainable for human life. Carbon tax, like I say, depending on who you're asking, what their opinion is. Personally, I think it's a great idea. At what cost, we're not sure yet.
Well, a carbon tax should have a positive effect on the environment, and I do think there are some studies that have shown that's having a positive effect on the environment, in that it's making companies think about ways to reduce carbon, or it's actually requiring them to pay when they emit carbon, which can be used for measures to put into funding services to better the environment and prepare for the crisis that's coming.
I think it does, because it kind of makes people conscious of what they're using and spending and stuff in terms of energy and water and whatnot.
Yes, it'll have a positive effect on the environment, but not on everybody's pocketbook, and that seems to be frustrating for a lot of people and businesses.
I think it's too soon to say. I think it's a new initiative they have. I would like to see it more pushed on the biggest carbon emitters, more so than like me and the next guy, who are just hardworking people trying to pay our bills. But I'm hopeful that it'll be efficient in the long term.
Yes, I do.
Why?
Because I think it's important to pay for the emissions that we produce, and I think it's a really good way to do that.
I don't believe in carbon taxes. I don't really see how it would have any kind of a practical effect. I mean, given the fact that we our emissions are this big anyway, I really don't see how that would, the money disappears in a general revenue. I really don't see how it's effective.
Well, how do you determine what is a fair tax? Like, how much is a carbon tax to how much you use? I don't know. Nobody can explain it really, so no, there's got to be a better way on that one.
It's a scam in my eyes. It really is. I find basically all it's doing is just raising gas prices. I've even heard other provinces, I've looked at the MPs on their social media, conservative MPs, who give evidence to the contrary. It's going to be positive, helping the environment. It's not, because we're only like a very small percentile of the pollution in the world compared to China and India.
Honestly speaking, from the background which I come from, I've stayed in Dubai as well as in India. Compared to that one, for me, by default, Canada is pretty clean, pretty good. So yeah, but the thing is, eventually with time, we will see differences. Because, people, if they have this mentality that, why are we the only one paying? No, it's always a collection, and I think Canadians have this responsibility too, that they should be holding on to themselves.
I do. I think they will, because it's a way to encourage people to think about alternatives.
And there's a lot of other case studies across the world. California, we look at other jurisdictions that have implemented a carbon tax or a cap and trade system, and it seems to be very effective. And so I think we're just learning from past learnings, and I think that's a good sign.
Not yet. I mean, it's too early to tell that. I think it will impact, it will benefit in the future, but it's been too early, right? It's only been carbon tax for a year now, year and a half, so, but I think it's to the better.
No, I don't agree with the carbon tax at all. I think there's better ways to achieve that. It's just another tax grab to me. I don't know, maybe they could take that marijuana money and start putting that towards environmental issues. There's a thought.
Statistically, it's a good thing for the environment, but it's how they're spending and allocating that money back to the environment. So they really should be developing more infrastructure instead of just taking that money and kind of pumping it into other places. So more emphasis on building solar panels, windmills, that kind of stuff with that money, but I haven't seen any of that infrastructure, at least in my day-to-day experiences. So, I mean, it's a good thing, but I don't know if they're using the funds properly.
I feel that the environmental policies of the earth and the movement has a positive impact. I think the carbon tax is a tool, much like a shovel is, and it needs to be used in certain areas where the shovel is needed. So blanket, we don't just apply the carbon tax everywhere. I think that we work with industry. Personally, if I look back in the 1990s when I was young and I was active, acid rain was a big issue. Acid rain's gone. Industry worked with government, they worked the problem and they solved it. Why can't we do this today?
It's incentivizing. It's an incentivizing policy, and I think that's what we need more of, in public incentives for us to do things differently.
No, that's an absolute joke. It's an absolute joke. So I'm going to throw money out. It's going to stop it from snowing or raining. You know, come on, give me a break. You got to be an absolute moron to believe that stuff. Can't stand it.
Canada is, of course, one of the greatest nations on earth in which to live. We have much to be thankful for, from our universal health care to the freedoms we enjoy. But with all the good also come some obstacles. So this is where we go with our next question.
What are the biggest challenges facing Canada today?
I think the environment. A reconciliation with Indigenous peoples is also extremely important, and they can be leaders in the environmental movement, but I think the environment for sure.
One of the biggest challenges, aside from the climate crisis, one of the biggest challenges Canada is facing is unity. You're seeing a lot of disunity in the country, whether it's the rise of the Bloc Québécois, the anger of people in the West with the Conservatives. I think that's a big problem that we're facing right now, aside from the climate crisis.
Well, first and foremost, the federal government being able to govern appropriately and with everyone in mind. I think that right now is the foremost thing. Economy, obviously, jobs, like I said before, health care. I think they're the paramount right now.
Healthcare, big challenges with nurses and doctors, especially like in Newfoundland, people being burnt out because there's not many, and with actually the minimum wage, there's a whole lot of areas.
Is oil our future, or do we need to take a different approach? I mean, wind energy is something that we can definitely look more into.
Personally, I would like to see a reformed electoral system. I'm very unhappy with what the Liberals did and backing away from their promise.
Everyone's kind of just pulling for each province, but no one's pulling for each other. And I think it's really hurting Newfoundland, obviously. And I think that's the biggest issue.
Getting a nice, strong economy, making sure that everybody has jobs in the future, making sure that we've still got getting the whole idea of Western alienation sorted out, goodness gracious me. Just trying to put this country on a path where it can continue to thrive now and decades into the future.
I also agree that the environment is one of the top ones, and viewing it as a crisis instead of something that we can kind of view in the long term or over time. Also, yes, decolonizing, and we can also kind of work on those two issues side by side as well and integrate it, and work on involving Indigenous communities in terms of conservation and involving their opinion in this reconciliation, and then healing the land and the relationships that were broken throughout time as well.
The biggest challenges facing Canada today are just the glaring differences I see from the far right and the left, and I feel like our biggest issue is that we need to come together more on issues and work together towards solutions, and all I see is really kind of a lot of butting heads. So I'd like to see a more fluid working government for us that works for us rather than settling their own affairs with each other. I don't know. I don't like government. I feel like government's a big issue right now, and they need to start working for the people more than they are.
I think foreign relations probably are up high on the list. I think we need to get our house in order internationally. I don't see that we used to punch way, as you know, to quote the old Prime Minister, we used to punch way above our weight. Now I perceive us to be a laughing stock. I don't really know much about foreign affairs, in the details, but yeah, I would say that's a good place to start.
Climate change is the number one thing. I think we have to take care of our society now so we have a future.
I think right now there's a unity issue, I think, for sure. And it's not just federal versus the West. I think there's issues out in Quebec. We have the rise of the Bloc, and I don't think the media has really paid that much attention to it. It's mostly this Wexit and federal government versus like Western Canada. I think we do have a problem with I don't know, I think, is it identity politics? I have no idea, but we do have an issue. People are segregating out.
Again, I would say, just based on my personal interests, one of the biggest challenges would be climate change and addressing the polarization on that topic. I think that's something that, especially in Calgary, there's a lot of different opinions on that, across Canada as well. So just trying to make people realize that climate change is not a partisan issue. It should be an issue that across all parties, it should be a priority, in my opinion.
Having all the immigrants come into Canada and everything else, it takes a lot of our resources to be able to take care of them, right? Our health care and housing, and so it just kind of snowballs every time, right?
Well, our Prime Minister, for one, I don't know, I think he's just an actor. He's had so many different roles before. I don't see, he's just like, oh, I'm Prime Minister now. It's another role for him. It's not a job. He's just an actor. Is our biggest problem, I believe.
The biggest challenges are we do need more people in our country. Our tax base isn't big enough. We're a huge country. There's room for growth.
At the end of the day, I've got 3 children at home, a loving wife. My biggest challenge is making sure that I take care of my family takes care of me, and then we take care of our neighbors. We don't do that very well these days. We're so worried about this big, giant global issue that we forget that we just have to work, and we have to learn, and we have to go to school, and we have to make tomorrow better than today.
Thanks for watching this episode of Outburst on the Cable Public Affairs channel. I'm Glenn McGuinness. If you have any comments or question ideas about this show or any other show, you can find us on social media. You can also check our website at www.cpac.ca. It's your turn to speak up, and we're listening.